I am really sorry, I am making way too many videos lately. Hello everyone, it's me, the one nerd again, and today I saw another thing on Twitter that annoyed me. Well, to be fair, that's every day, but this time I saw something I felt strongly enough to make a video about. So Matt Braly, I apologize if I'm not pronouncing that correctly, the creator of Amphibia, made headlines today, but not the good kind like you want. They replied to a Discussing Films post about how Disney is pressing creatives to pitch them movies that appeal to Gen Z males. That reply,
Oh, won't somebody please think of the
Gen Z males. And certain sectors of the internet did not like that. Mostly people who just want to react to things without thinking. Now, don't get me wrong, I can understand how if someone were to look at this at a glance, they may see it as bad. On the surface, it seems like Matt is trying to bash Gen Z males or say that they don't need to be appealed to, which sure, if the only thing you know about modern cartoons is what you get from clownfish, then you may think Western animation is dying, specifically because there are no action cartoons like there were back in the day when I was a kid, and specifically no cartoons that appeal exclusively to young males, which is not an opinion I agree with, but we'll get to that. Now, in response to other comments, Matt clarified that his issue is not necessarily about trying to make something to appeal to young males, but making something to appeal to a specific demographic. In regards to specific demos, I agree that shows should not be made with an audience in mind. Demographics, that is. Specific gender demographics, that is. I understand that there are many shows that you can consider a girl show or a boy show. Even a traditionally girl show can appeal to everybody, if it's done well. Do we really need to be reminded of My Little Pony Friendship is Magic? Back in the day, some of my favorite shows were ones that, especially in retrospect, I could see as appealing to both girls and boys. Looking back, could you really say that Rocko's Modern Life was made just to appeal to little boys? Or Cow and Chicken, Cat Dog, Rugrats, Foster's, Billy and Mandy?
maybe some cartoons will cheer you up.
Even shows that on the surface look like they would just appeal to girls, like Powerpuff Girls, are ones that have a clear and mass fan base of all genders. What's funny is that Powerpuff Girls is a very famous example of a show that was almost ruined because it didn't immediately appeal to young boys in focus groups.
Craig panicked that afternoon, and he came back that evening and redesigned the whole show in a night.
I went, they're too weird. They don't have fingers, they don't have ears, and some people thought they were bugs.
I was in that focus group. I had a problem with the fingers.
But I got this call from Mike Lazo, and he basically told me, he said, Craig, look, we like this short, and I know you got a negative reaction, but I'm much more interested in a negative reaction than a lukewarm reaction.
I mean, the original pilot of Powerpuff Girls was called Whoop-Ass Girls. I mean, that's a title that really is going to appeal to young boys. When I was a kid, my sister used to watch this show called Daria on MTV. Every time she would turn it on, I would huff and puff about it being a girl show and I didn't want to watch it. Until I actually started to watch it. What I found was one of my favorite animated shows of the time, and one I've ended up watching more and more times than the show it spun off from, Beavis and Butthead. Why? It had good humor, a relatable protagonist, good stories, interesting characters, which kind of brings up the biggest point around this, and one of the things that I believe Matt had an issue with the original story. For those who may not know, Amphibia was a show that aired on the Disney Channel, which actually had a pretty good streak of animation both for story-focused serials and episodic comedies, like Amphibia, Owl House, Big City Greens, Stugo, DuckTales, The Ghost and Molly McGee, and others. These are shows that, in my personal opinion, do not specifically appeal to any one demographic over another, again, at least in regards to gender. Some might say that Amphibia, Owl House, and Ghost and Molly McGee would be girl shows, but I ask why? Because they have girl leads? Because the breakdown for protagonists in Amphibia, for example, would be 2 males and 2 females. Amphibia is in a fantasy setting that includes a long journey, action, comedy, and even robots. But for some, it's just a girl show. Seeing a lot of replies in regards to this makes me think that everyone assumes that Matt does not see value in appealing to young boys at all. Which is stupid when you remember that Matt himself is a boy, and was, more than likely, once a young boy. His previous show, Amphibia, but have a few references to anime that many would consider to appeal to young boys, like Gundam and specifically G Gundam. And his current project, a comic called Family Force V, is a Sentai-inspired comic about a family of heroes fighting against an alien threat, another trope many consider appealing to boys. Matt's issue here is not about making a show that appeals to boys, but thinking a show needs to exist that appeals to boys only. Of course, he didn't make this case easy for himself when he previously made a statement about the recent success of K-pop Demon Hunters, specifically that it was nice that a movie succeeded that included female leads. People quickly equated this to Matt saying K-pop Demon Hunters was good because it appealed to a female audience. But it's not what he said. He just said that it was good that it had female leads. Now, I would gladly argue with him over if we've reached a point where female leads are in parity with their male ones. But depending on how you look at it, it's still nice to see a movie like that do well. The problem is that no one is interested in trying to understand where he's coming from. We've been hearing from grifters and hacks for years that Western animation is dead and they don't make shows for kids anymore and blah blah blah. I especially liked the argument I saw saying how anime is taking over the market share from Western cartoons, and they're going to kill them. Which is funny, because the same people always claim anime is dead too because of the companies like Crunchyroll are being taken over by SJWs and Western localizers. One person referred to Crunchyroll as the worst way to watch anime, and they encourage people to torrent anime instead. Which I find hilarious, considering all anime you see on torrent sites are just rips from Crunchyroll. So you're taking extra steps to avoid Crunchyroll because you think they're doing a bad job specifically with translating the shows, but you're still watching those poor translations from Crunchyroll. The biggest argument I've seen out of this is that there's no more action cartoons anymore. Action cartoons seem to be a huge point of contention for people, something that everyone seems to want back. Look, back in the 90s and early 2000s and even the late 2000s, action cartoons were a thing. Some of the biggest examples were things like Samurai Jack, various superhero shows like Superman, Batman, the Justice League, Ben 10, Generator Rex, and so on. I am, of course, not counting the various anime coming out at the time, since we're talking about Western cartoons, which of course they were trying to copy the style at the time. That and superheroes getting popular again saw a lot of action cartoons. But as all things go, tastes change and people move on, and action cartoons became far less prominent than they were. What caused this? Well, there could be a lot of reasons, many of which I'm sure would be a decision of a high-level executive looking at various numbers and figures, but I think Cartoon Network and Warner Brothers were the last bastion of it. Around 2011 to 2013, WB had a few more action-based cartoons airing on Cartoon Network. Batman Brave and the Bold, Thundercats, Young Justice, Green Lantern, and Beware the Batman. A few of these shows had their own toy lines which would fail in one way or another. I remember personally when Young Justice and Thundercats toys first hit the shelves, and many would stay there. At least in my area, people were just not interested in it, despite the toys being pretty good. The Young Justice line in particular was a favorite of mine. But something about them just didn't hit with people. And for the time, toy lines were everything with action cartoons. I mean, look at Ben 10. Those toys were flying off the shelves and the show lasted forever. A very toyetic concept. Now, I'm sure we can make the argument that these shows were not what people wanted at the time, but other action shows would have done better. Maybe. But Young Justice was still a beloved show, enough for it to be brought back years later. Thundercats is still seen as an underappreciated remake of a beloved franchise, especially after years later when Cartoon Network would try to reboot the franchise again as a Teen Titans Go-inspired comedy series with disastrous results.
You've shown me that Thundercats Roar is a worthy successor, and anyone who says otherwise has a poop mouth with poop opinions.
There would be action cartoons that would come up here and there in other places. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles has always had a pretty consistent string of animated shows. Around the time Cartoon Network was trying and failing with their action shows, TMNT 2012 was currently airing and seeing massive success on Nickelodeon with a successful show and toy line. Legit, the 2012 TMNT toy line is one of the best lines since the original 80s one. Later on, Rise of TMNT would air to mixed reviews, But despite it taking a bit of a different direction with the TMNT formula, including making Raph the leader of the team or the introduction of magic weapons, it was still a nice mix of comedy and action. Although even now, when the show is brought up, it's mocked for its action scenes looking too much like anime. Which is weird, because so much Discourse is about wanting more action cartoons and that anime is overtaking Western cartoons. When a cartoon includes action, and maybe inspired by anime, it's just, no, not like that, another way. The truth of the matter is, there is no surefire way to bring back action cartoons to air. From the perspective of some fans, there are scores of action cartoons that are just waiting to be greenlit by studios, but they just won't do it. I assume they think that's the case because they have a disdain for males or some other such talking point. But I never see creators saying they have an action show to make, but no one will pick it up. Some shows that may be considered action slip through now and then. There was the underappreciated classic Motor City that came and went in the blink of an eye, or the Netflix/Nickelodeon show Glitch Techs. But the bigger trend right now seems to be more about adventure shows after the massive success of, funnily enough, Adventure Time. Now we see a ton of shows with adventure and fantasy settings that mix slice-of-life one-off episodes with overarching stories. Shows previously mentioned like Owl House and Amphibia fit into this, but also shows like OKKO, another action show ignored by groups apparently starving for it, Gravity Falls, Ghosts of Molly McGee, and others. Cartoon Network even got in on the adventure show miniseries with Infinity Train and Over the Garden Wall. Fantastic shows that are not talked about nearly enough by people who claim to want good cartoons. Many of these shows, in fact, all of them in my opinion, are shows made to appeal to a broad audience across both genders, which brings up an interesting question I try to ask when navigating all of this. What makes a show for girls or for boys? I had a conversation with a follower who said boys' shows were motivated by action, whereas girls' shows were pushed by emotion. Another one of my mutuals described boys' cartoons as about action and female stories are story-based, which he called a holdover from the 80s and 90s marketing strategy. Which I do agree is a holdover, something that many creators don't really seem to think about now. Mostly because most cartoons don't exactly have toy lines to push to either boys or girls anymore. Heck, one of the biggest cartoons I've seen to get a toy line nowadays is Bluey, and everyone loves Bluey. For the longest time, one of the biggest inside jokes you would see when animators would gripe about the process is dealing with network people. The biggest example, of course, would be the iconic Poochie episode of The Simpsons.
Hey, this ain't art, it's business.
This is represented in both how focus groups work.
They like itchy, they like scratchy. One kid seems to love the Speedo Man.
And in regards to networks meddling in the design process.
Can we put him in more of a hip-hop context?
Forget context, he's gotta be a surfer. Give me a nice smear of surfer.
I feel we should Rastify him by 10% or so.
This also comes across in the story I mentioned previously about the development of the Powerpuff Girls, and another story from the showrunner of the Green Lantern animated series, which is a nice little comic showing the frustration of running a show, having to deal with notes from network heads who may not get it, and how all you can do when trapped in that structure is just do the best you can. I think I mentioned before in other videos or maybe on social media that I advocate for creators of all shapes and sizes to go indie if they can. Be it with indie animation studios funded by merch like Glitch or Spindlehorse, or getting funded with Patreon or other such support platforms. I actually think what Glitch and Spindlehorse have done is really phenomenal, considering that they are using places like Netflix and Prime as simple platforms, where they're just using their shows to get more eyeballs and don't have to change anything based on network notes. They're still fully in control. I understand this is not something that can be done overnight, and it's not something that everyone's gonna do. It's not gonna be for everybody. I don't begrudge anyone for staying in that studio system. Hell, it's been around longer than I have, and it's produced some amazing works. Of course, I understand this is also back when shows were mostly all episodic TV, with no real overarching story of any kind. That is a criticism I do have for creators who want to work in that studio structure. Shows with a serialized story just don't play well in a lot of cases when we're talking about how American TV works. I mean, shows with overarching plots can really be hard to show in reruns. Oh sure, if you're a streaming only show, it could serve you a bit better, but even in that case, it can still screw you. Like the absolutely tragic case of Inside Job, which was canceled in its second season on a massive cliffhanger that will never be resolved, leaving fans of the show reminded of that fact every time a clickbait shared of it. But that's the risk when you create anything that's serialized. I actually really like the way Japan handles this process. I know, nerd likes Japanese thing, real shocker, but think about it. Most if not all anime that releases each season is based on a manga, which are usually written and drawn by one person. Then that manga is released chapter by chapter in a weekly magazine. There's not just Shonen Jump, there are a ton of different magazines that publish manga. Some magazines are not even strictly comic focused, they're just regular magazines that just happen to have some manga in the back. Those magazines will usually have what some may call a focus group in the form of a survey that readers can send in to express how they feel about each story in the magazine that week and which ones they like better. These same surveys are also used for things like character popularity polls, which is why you see a lot of them in shonen series. It used to be when Shonen Jump released a weekly magazine in America, they had that same survey, but not anymore, since all the individual chapters are just released digitally each week. Which still works since they can obviously tell through the app how many people are reading each series and for how long. And of course, anyone could turn around and say that the Japanese system I like so much categorizes all of the stories into boy and girl magazines, and fair enough, but my cop-out to that is that it's more of a cultural thing. If you follow me on Twitter, which I recommend everyone do, I'm always happy to see new fans, I had some interesting conversations with some people about this. Some were clearly brain-rotted and had no interest in having a productive conversation, saying that they feel sorry for Matt's son, saying his behavior makes sense because he was raised by a single mother, or just calling Amphibia gay and moving on. Some who had real arguments but would always really boil down to making something for everyone means making something for no one. Which is a statement I can't tell you how many times I heard repeated back to me. Thing is, this is not necessarily true. Disney and Pixar at its peak were making movies that were looking to appeal to as many people as possible. There were no boys movies or girls movies. These were everyone movies with stories, themes, and adventures that everyone could relate to. These were big tentpole movies, but some with seemingly new standards and how people see media now are mostly just boiled down to princess movies. I've heard people that say that if it's a musical, it's for girls, as if guys don't like show tunes. But I also talk to people who say Matt's comments more as something coming from personal experience. The genre that Matt worked in for Amphibia, which was pure fantasy epic, is a genre that's enjoyed by both boys and girls. And maybe it's just his personal experience that this should not be split by gender. I admit, and I've said this from the beginning, that Matt did not word the statement well. Could have done a better job. Since I'm being generous, I see Matt as mocking the idea of Disney wanting to appeal to Gen Z males when young males are already the most advertised two groups in most cases in media.
I'm a white male, age 18 to 49. Everyone listens to me, no matter how dumb my suggestions are.
Disney actually tried several times to find a movie that would relate to young males and failed every time, most notably with Lightyear. Matt is a creator who clearly writes for young males as part of the demo that he's going for because of the various references to anime he makes. His current project, Family Force V, is inspired by Super Sentai shows that has a lot of action that young males are supposedly looking for. His post was poorly worded, but judging by other statements that he's made, it's clear it's just about making good shows. To boil down his statements into hating young boys and not wanting to appeal to them because of some sense of liberal outrage is just stupid. If anything, you're wanting to be outraged. This is Twitter we're talking about. People are expressing their thoughts and feelings in short forms all the time, and sometimes they're just not worded the best. And of course, if people were just trying to express their points, this would be a whole different conversation. I might not even be making this video. But to lie about what he said and the intent in his words is not helpful at all, especially when you allow people to make disgusting comments about him and his work, and justify it by saying things like, well, look at what he posted, we should have seen it coming. To not even try to understand what he may be going for shows your bias, and frankly, it's an obvious conclusion to a generation of grifters telling you that Western animation is dead and all shows are not worth trying because they don't look like the shows that they used to watch as a kid. Tastes change, trends change, people make different shows. I try to watch a little bit of everything. I was there for Steven Universe and Adventure Time from the start. I eagerly awaited new episodes of Owl House and Amphibia. I constantly sang the praises of Jellystone and Ghosts of Molly McGee, and many, many more. I'm currently catching up on shows like Wild Park and Stugo, 2 shows that I cannot recommend enough. I can't say I like everything. Shows like Loud House don't really grab me, but at least I give everything a try. I don't just see a few pictures online and call it gay because the character designs are too round. You may call me an animationist cinema guy as a pejorative, but I love animation, cartoons, and the like. I watch everything and love almost everything.
Really? Whatever. I like liking things.
I'm not an expert, I'm not expecting everyone to do the same, but it's more fashionable to hate, easier to dismiss, more profitable to trash. I really need to be careful there because I am gonna come off as jealous of other channels who have bigger audiences. Trust me, I would rather be broke and working a normal 9 to 5 than have a Nerdrotics audience. But I think I've talked enough about this. I want to know what you think. If you're a creator, do you write to try to appeal to a specific demo, like a specific gender or age? Or do you just try to write what you think is good? Maybe you have a recommendation for a show you thought was overlooked or overly hated. Or you just want to say hi. Well, leave a comment or head over to my Twitter, follow me there. Until next time, this is The One Nerd, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.